Morning light crept across the empty auction yard, soft as breath through dust. The pens were nearly bare now, the air holding the hollow quiet that follows disappointment. Jed Carver stood by the gate, hat low against the wind, the weight of years pressing through his shoulders. His coat hung loose, patched at the elbows, his boots worn to the stitching. Once he'd been known across 3 counties for his horse stock. Now he came here with only a few dollars folded inside a cracked leather wallet. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Maybe a reason to keep trying. The auctioneer's voice rasped through the loudspeaker, weary from a day of losing bids. Most of what came through now were animals too thin to sell or too stubborn to break. Then they brought out the draft horse, a massive gray with a limp in his hind leg and eyes dull by pain. The crowd shifted, muttering. Someone laughed. "You'll spend more feeding him than he's worth." Another called out, "That one's good for hauling ghosts, not wagons." The auctioneer sighed, tried once, then twice, before shrugging. "No offers? We'll move on." Jed's voice surprised even him. "I'll take him." A few heads turned, curious or pitying. The auctioneer blinked, then smirked. "What do you pay, Carver?" Jed opened his palm. 3 crumpled bills and a worn bag of feed he'd brought to barter. "That's all I've got." For a long moment, there was only the wind. Then the gavel hit the table. "Sold." Laughter followed him as he led the horse from the pen, but Jed didn't look back. Up close, the animal smelled of rain and neglect, ribs pressing through skin like unspoken stories. The limp was bad, but not hopeless. There was strength beneath the sorrow, a quiet endurance that stirred something in Jed's chest. He rubbed the horse's neck, feeling the tremor under his hand. "You and me both, friend," he murmured. They walked the long road home together, shadows stretching over frost-bitten grass. The sky turned amber, then bruised blue, the world shrinking to the sound of 2 uneven sets of footsteps. Jed's ranch waited miles away, a sagging barn, a half-frozen well. No one left to greet him. But as the horse trudged beside him, head lowered yet steady, the road didn't seem quite so empty. He caught himself humming an old tune, one he hadn't remembered in years. By the time they reached the ridge, night had gathered. Jed paused, looking out the valley below. Fields gone brown, fences leaning like tired men. The horse shifted beside him, letting out a soft breath that rose in the cold like smoke. Jed smiled faintly. "Reckon we'll manage, you and I." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of snow and distant rain, and for the first time in a long while, Jed felt something almost like hope. The barn creaked like an old man remembering his youth. Jed pushed the door open and led the horse inside, the air thick with the scent of hay and rust. Dust motes drifted through a single beam of light, settling over a space that had known too many winters alone. He tied the gray to a post, ran a hand over the coarse mane, and studied the creature properly for the first time. The horse's hide was scarred in patches, one ear notched, the limp deep but measured, painful yet stubbornly endured. Jed nodded as though the animal had confirmed something he already suspected. "We'll call you Dusty," he said softly. The horse flicked an ear, but didn't turn away. Over the next days, life found a rhythm. Jed rose before dawn, fed Dusty small portions, and spoke to him in low murmurs that filled the silence between chores. The sound of another living thing steadied him, like a song hummed through loneliness. He mended the leaking roof with old planks, patched the fence with wire left from better years, all while the horse watched with slow, curious eyes. In the evenings, Jed sat by the stall with a tin mug of coffee gone cold, talking about weather and memories no one else wanted to hear. Dusty listened, and sometimes when the wind was still, breathed against Jed's sleeve as if offering comfort. Winter came early, painting the valley in shades of silver and quiet. Jed found himself watching the snow fall across the paddock, his reflection faint in the barn window. A man smaller than he once was, yet steadier somehow. He brushed Dusty's coat each night, careful around the lame leg, whispering praise for progress too small for anyone else to notice. Once, as he rubbed down the horse's neck, his fingers caught on something strange, a faint ridge beneath the hair, shaped like a brand long healed over. He froze. The mark was deliberate, burned deep once, though now faint under age and scar. He cleaned the area with warm water, studying it by lamplight, the symbol half buried beneath time, a circle with wings or maybe flames. Something official, not ranch-made. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching snow bury the world in silence. The horse shifted in the barn, a steady rhythm of breath and straw. Jed's thoughts wandered to where such a mark might come from: military, research stock, a forgotten breeder's line. He didn't know. But what unsettled him wasn't mystery. It was recognition. The mark felt older than chance, as though the horse had carried a history meant to find him. He poured another cup of coffee and smiled faintly at his own foolishness. "You got secrets, don't you, boy?" he whispered toward the dark. Outside, wind stirred the snow from the roof, and Dusty's soft snort answered him, a quiet promise that the story was only beginning. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world wash pale and still. Jed saddled his old truck and drove the winding road into town, the horse's brand weighing on his thoughts like an unanswered question. The veterinary office stood near the grain store, its windows fogged, the bell above the door ringing softly as he entered. Dr. Miller looked up from a ledger, surprised. "Haven't seen you in a spell, Carver. What brings you in?" Jed hesitated, then unfolded a scrap of paper on which he'd sketched a mark. "Found this on a horse I picked up. Thought you might know it." The vet squinted, tracing the shape with a gloved finger. His face changed, the color draining like ink in water. "Where'd you say you got this?" Jed frowned. "Auction yard. Paid near nothing." Miller exhaled slowly, leaning back. "That's not a ranch brand. Belonged to a breeding program up north, government funded. They were breeding draft stock for specialized rescue operations. Genetic lines worth more than gold. There was a fire years ago. Lost nearly everything. But one horse was never accounted for." He met Jed's gaze. That brand belonged to the last stallion in that line. The words sat heavy between them. Jed rubbed the back of his neck. "You saying this horse is worth money?" Miller nodded. "More than you can imagine. Insurance had him listed at $2 million before the fire." Jed stared at the window, where snowflakes brushed the glass and melted. He thought of Dusty's limp, the way he leaned into his hand, the quiet trust that had begun to form. Money couldn't measure that. "Don't suppose I care what he's worth," he said finally. "He's mine, long as he wants to stay." On the drive home, the horizon stretched endless and cold, but inside Jed's chest something burned. Fear or pride, he couldn't tell. He thought how often life had taken from him: land, time, the people he loved. And now, by chance or grace, it had given something back. Still, he knew the truth wouldn't stay hidden. Secrets had a way of finding their way home. That night, he sat by the barn with the letter he'd avoided for years, the one marked with his son's name. The paper trembled in his rough hands as he finally unfolded it. The ink had faded, but the words still breathed. "If you ever find something broken, don't walk away. Heal it, Dad, and it'll heal you too." Jed closed his eyes. The fire cracked softly, Dusty shifting in the stall nearby. The letter rested on his knee, the weight of it warm. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the smell of snow and pine to the open barn door. Jed looked toward the dark field and whispered, "Reckon I will, son." The horse lifted his head, eyes gleaming in the firelight, as though he'd heard and understood. The next morning broke with the kind of stillness that carries change. Frost shimmered across the fences, and the first rays of sun turned the snowfields gold. Jed stepped outside with a mug of coffee, steam curling to the cold, and saw the dust trail before he heard the engine. A black SUV pulled up the drive, its tires crunching over the frozen ground. A woman stepped out, tall, wrapped in a wool coat, her face drawn tight by sleepless nights. "Mr. Carver?" she asked, voice trembling between relief and disbelief. He nodded warily. "Name's Clara Dane. I think you've got one of ours." Her gaze moved past him to the barn, where Dusty's silhouette stood against the morning light. When she saw the faint brand on his neck, her composure cracked. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes filling. "It's him," she whispered. "We thought he'd perished in the fire. He was the last of their line." Her words fell like prayer. Jed studied her a moment, seeing both grief and gratitude flicker across her face. "He's alive," he said quietly, "and he's found himself a home." Inside the barn, Clara approached Dusty slowly. The horse turned his head toward her, uncertain, but when she reached out, he did not flinch. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she stroked his muzzle. "My father spent half his life breeding these horses," she said softly. "When the stables burned, it broke him. We thought this one was gone forever." Jed nodded, feeling the quiet weight of her loss. "Seems he wasn't ready to quit on us just yet." Clara turned to him. "He's insured for over $2 million. You've been caring for a fortune without knowing it." Jed smiled faintly, shaking his head. "He's worth more than that to me. Money can't feed the soul." She studied him for a long moment, then said, "Let me help. The program's rebuilding. We could sponsor your ranch, restore it, make this his permanent home." For a moment, pride stiffened his spine, but the sincerity in her voice softened it. "You'd do that?" he asked. "For him," she replied. "And for you?" Weeks later, the barn stood strong again, its roof new, its walls smelling of fresh-cut pine. Clara visited often, bringing tools, seeds, and company Jed hadn't known he'd missed. Together they hung a small wooden sign over the gate. Luke's Promise Ranch. The name caught the sunlight, bright against the winter sky. Dusty grazed in the pasture below, his limp nearly gone, his breath misting in the cold. Jed rested his hands on the fence, watching the horse lift his head toward the horizon. "Guess some things are meant to find their way back," he murmured. Clara smiled beside him, silent in agreement. The wind moved through the fields like a blessing, carrying his words to the open sky. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.